Hello and welcome to Worldview, a program designed to bring you up to speed with trending developments the world over. My name is Francis Oyima, Edet, reaching you live from Yo, the capital city of Akwa State. And on our top stories today, far-right outsider Javier Milei wins Argentina presidential runoff election. U.S. President Joe Biden urges Palestinian Authority to govern Gaza Strip and West Bank following Israel-Hamas war. French Senate to weigh compensation for victims of anti-gay laws. We will bring you details of these and more in a moment. Many thanks for joining us. First, on our worldview, far-right libertarian outsider Javier Milei has won Argentina's presidential runoff poll. Reports say that Milei rival Economy Minister Sergio Massa called him to concede. Former U.S. President Donald Trump congratulated Milei on his victory, saying he would make Argentina great again. The election comes at a difficult time for Argentina, with rising inflation and an economy in crisis. Milei's proposals, which included blowing up the central bank, won support with voters desperate for change. Provisional results suggest that the confounded pollster by easily defeating the candidates of the governing Peronist by more than 10 points. With almost 90% of votes counted, Milei had nearly 56% of the vote compared with 44% of Massa. In another development, Maldives' new president, Mohamed Muazu, has campaigned on altering the tiny Indian Ocean archipelago's India First policy, has requested India withdraw its military from the country. Muazu won the presidential election in September, ousting Ibrahim Solih in a runoff after promising to remove a small Indian military presence of some 75 personnel. Reports say India and China have been vying for influence in the region, with the coalition begging Muazu considered to be leaning more towards China. Away from that, U.S. President Joe Biden says the Palestinian Authority should ultimately govern the Gaza Strip and the West Bank following the Israel-Hamas war. Biden, in an opinion article, said, as a strive for peace, Gaza and the West Bank should be reunited under a single governance structure, ultimately under a revitalized Palestinian Authority, stressing that there must be no forcible displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, no reoccupation, no siege or blockade, and no reduction in territory. He used the OPED to try to answer the question of what the United States wants for Gaza once the conflict is over. Meanwhile, former U.S. First Lady Rosalynn Carter, the wife of former President Jimmy Carter, has died at the age of 96 at the couple's home in the southern state of Georgia. Carter was best known for her work post-White House, and she and her husband championed human rights, democracy, and health issues around the world, all while maintaining a notably humble public image. Reports say Rosalynn had joined her husband at home-based care on Friday after being diagnosed with dementia in May before her death. In the meantime, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin made an unannounced visit to Kyiv today in a high-profile push to keep money and weapons flowing to Ukraine, even as U.S. and international resources are stretched by the new global risks raised by the Israel-Hamas conflict. Austin, who traveled to Kyiv by train from Poland, is scheduled to meet with senior Ukrainian officials and publicly press Ukraine's urgent military needs as it enters another tough winter of fighting. This is Austin's second trip to Kyiv, but he is making it under far different circumstances. His first visit occurred in April 2022, just 2 months after Russia's large-scale invasion. At the time, Ukraine was riding a wave of global rage at Moscow's invasion, and Austin launched an international effort that now sees 50 countries meet monthly to coordinate on what weapons, training, and other support could be pushed to Kyiv. But the conflict in Gaza could pull attention and resources from the Ukraine fight. The U.S. has worked feverishly since the October 7 attacks by Hamas on Israel and the weeks of devastating bombardment on Gaza by Israel that has followed, killing more than 10,000 civilians to keep those attacks from turning into a regional war. Elsewhere, prosecutors with Special Counsel Jack Smith's team will urge a 3-judge panel of the Washington-based appeals court to put back in place an order barring the former president from making inflammatory statements about lawyers in the case and potential weaknesses. The prosecutors say those restrictions are necessary to prevent Trump from undermining confidence in the court system and intimidating people who may be called to testify against him. Meanwhile, defense lawyers have called the gag order an unconstitutional muzzling of Trump's free speech rights and say prosecutors have presented no evidence to support the idea that his words have caused harm or made anyone feel threatened. Reports say the gag order is one of multiple contentious issues being argued ahead of the landmark March 2024 trial. Defense lawyers are also trying to get the case dismissed by arguing that Trump, as a former president, is immune from prosecution and protected by the First Amendment from being charged. The outcome of today's arguments won't affect those constitutional claims, but it will set parameters on what Trump, as both a criminal defendant and leading presidential candidate, can and cannot say ahead of the trial. In a separate development, researchers in India are looking at fresh options to save 41 workers trapped in a tunnel for the past 8 days. Reports say new plans had to be conceived after work to push in metal pipes through the debris wall was halted and rescue teams were withdrawn after a cracking sound was heard from the tunnel on Friday. Officials say they plan to drill 2 parallel tunnels which could provide an escape route to the workers. The under-construction tunnel in Uttarakhand caved in after a landslide. Recall that the incident took place on the morning of 12 November in the northern state's Uttarakhand district. Meanwhile, contact with the trapped men was established soon after that, and they are being provided oxygen, food, and water since then. Away from that, Philippines National Disaster Agency has disclosed that number of people killed in the powerful quake of the southern Philippines has risen to 9. The agency warned that the toll could increase further. The National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council said at least 15 people were injured and more than 800 houses were damaged or destroyed. And that toll steadily rose over the weekend as searchers found more bodies buried under the rubble. In another development, France's Senate is this week to debate a draft law that would allow people convicted under anti-gay laws before 1982 to receive financial compensation. Reports say thousands of people were sentenced under 2 French laws in force between 1942 and 1962. One determining the age of consent for same-sex relations and the other defining such relations as an aggravating factor in acts of public outrage. A sponsor of the bill to be debated on Wednesday, Senator Hazine Bourgui of the Socialist Party, said he wanted the French government to recognize the state's role in discriminating against people engaging in same-sex relations. Meanwhile, holding olive branches and white banners, French performers from different religious and ethnic backgrounds led thousands of people on a silent march through central Paris to call for peace between Israelis and Palestinians and unity in France. The crowd, which included actors Isabelle Adjani and Emmanuel Biet, as well as singers and other cultural figures, marched from the Arab World Institute towards the Museum of Art and History, of Judaism located across the Seine River. French, home to significant Jewish and Muslim population, has seen weeks of protest and tension over the Israel-Hamas war. Meanwhile, the French government is pushing for a truce to get humanitarian aid to Palestinian civilians in Gaza and also trying to negotiate the release of 8 French hostages held by Hamas. Reports say another 40 French citizens were killed in the October 7 Hamas attack in southern Israel. Away from that, fighting in Myanmar between the military junta and an alliance of ethnic armed groups has intensified since late October after an unprecedented offensive in the country's north exposed the junta's struggles on the ground. Recall that the UN called for all sides to respect international law in a statement on Friday, saying that more than 70 civilians had already been killed and some 200,000 displaced by the upsurge in violence. Prosecutors with Special Counsel Jack Smith's team will urge a 3-judge panel of the Washington-based appeals court to put back in place an order barring the former president from making inflammatory statements about lawyers in the case and potential weaknesses. After the break, UK Somalia Food Summit opens in London. Stay tuned for more details on these and more right after this breather. Many thanks and welcome back to the concluding part of the Worldview. Former Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Augustin Matata Ponyo, has withdrawn from next month's presidential election. Ponyo said he would now be backing Moise Katumbi, a businessman and former governor of the Katanga region. The former Prime Minister noted that he believes other opposition candidates will follow in his footsteps to withdraw in support of Katumbi. Meanwhile, President Cyril Ramaphosa today said South Africans should not let the Israel-Gaza conflict deepen divisions. This comes after a pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian protest clash in Cape Town last week. The president addressed this incident in his weekly letter, saying it was troubling and unacceptable. Meanwhile, President Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC have expressed solidarity with Palestinians. He said support for the Palestinian struggle cannot be equated with anti-Semitism. Ramaphosa went on to condemn an Israeli newspaper that called its government's support for the Palestinians a sign of the country's encouraging pogroms against the South African Jewish community. He later urged South Africans to not turn against each other as this conflict unfolds. Recall that last week South Africa referred Israel's government to the International Criminal Court (ICC) over its actions in the Gaza conflict. In the meantime, the South African authorities have warned of a heat wave with higher than average maximum temperatures expected in some parts of the country this week. The Weather Service said heat waves conditions resulting in persistently high temperatures were expected in parts of Eastern Cape, Mpumalanga, Limpopo, Gauteng, and KwaZulu-Natal provinces. The authorities urge people to take precautions by avoiding exposure to sun and drink lots of water, among other measures. Reports say heat wave is a period of hot weather where temperatures are higher than is expected for the time of the year. In another development, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has opened the Global Food Security Summit in London. The conference is a joint initiative between Britain, Somalia, and the United Arab Emirates (UAE), as well as organizations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. According to reports, representatives from more than 20 countries are attending SONAC. SONAC announced a new virtual hub to link British scientists with global research into climate-resilient crops as the summit began. The UN urged donors to urgently increase their aid and invest in long-term solutions to tackle what it called the root causes of hunger. Meanwhile, President William Ruto has said that he is aiming to secure opportunities for Kenyans to find employment in Germany amid a worsening unemployment crisis in his country. He made this known shortly before departing for Europe for G20 meeting. More than a dozen African leaders are heading to the German capital, Berlin, to seek economic opportunities, including labor, export deals, and increased investment in Africa's economy. Chancellor Ola Skol, whose recent visit to Africa have included trips to Kenya and Nigeria, has shown interest in boosting investment on the continent, especially in the critical minerals and green energy sectors. This conference, under the heading of G20 Compact with Africa, aims to strengthen economic ties between African and G20 countries. Meanwhile, heavy fighting erupted today around the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza, where thousands of patients and displaced people have been sheltering for weeks as the Israeli military forces on medical centers it says are being used by Hamas. The fighting came as Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told a delegation of visiting Arab and Muslim leaders that Beijing was ready to help restore peace in the Middle East. Lastly, on Worldview today, delays at South Africa's port of Durban has led to a huge backlog in dealing with the cargo. According to local media report, an estimated 70,000 containers are waiting to be offloaded from more than 60 vessels. Reports say it will take at least 7 weeks to clear the build-up. Meanwhile, business